All right. Let's do a new Jubilee video. Yeah, it's called Undecided Teens Must Choose Liberals versus Conservatives. I'm curious. We always like a good Jubilee video. Let's see what we got here.
Weren't working. Antidepressants weren't working. We'd been to every single therapist and
Crazy.
nothing was touching it until we used he, him pronouns.
I don't even know where to start here. Sex is not assigned
Kind of sounds like me a little.
at birth, it's established at conception. We have to get to biology here.
Today we're bringing a new version of Middle Ground. We'll be exploring the topic, should minors be allowed to medically transition? We'll be introducing an
Wow. That's like, why not just ask that question in the Jubilee? It's called Undecided Teens Must Choose.
undecided group, and they'll be listening to a discussion between liberals and conservatives, and the undecided group will pick a side after each prompt.
Whoa. Okay, cool. Interesting concept.
Transitioning has become a social media trend.
Yeah, kind of. Yes and no. I think the question isn't necessarily wrong. Like, yeah, of course, there are people on TikTok or on social media that are transitioning for attention. 1000% happening. It's yes, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people who are like legitimately transitioning because they need to transition. It's mostly going to be young people exploring their gender, and trying to monetize, honestly, trends, and then a few years later they're going to stop. They're not going to care anymore, and they're not going to realize that they've caused a little bit of damage to the community of people who are actually trans because they are a poor representation of them.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it is just skyrocketing.
When I say transition, though, nobody's going through medical transition for social media attention, just to be clear. But, you know, I feel like there's plenty of people identifying as non-binary, which is real. It's a real identification, but there's plenty of people that are doing it just for attention. So
the amount of children that you see falling into this, and we need to stop it.
Absolutely not. People said the same thing about people coming out being lesbian, gay, or bisexual as it got more normalized, as people became more accepting of like their children and things like that. They're like, everybody wants.
Yeah, that's true. Like, again, the difference is that we live in social media generation, and I think that people need to accurately just be like, yeah, there are some people doing it for attention, for views, but that's not all of them. And just so that we know that there is a difference between, you know, I mostly just be like, it's kids exploring their gender. I don't really give a shit, you know. But yeah, sure.
Wants to be gay. Now social media is around, people my age, like we see other trans people, and being aware that that's something that's being accepted by other people makes you more comfortable with yourself and like comfortable with like internalizing that it's okay to be trans in public.
I think you're falling prey to the survivorship bias, which is just sort of, you're overlooking all of the cases of people who either weren't able to come out because they weren't comfortable or safe to do so, or they either died due to suicide or other mental health reasons. But over time, if you look at left-handedness, that skyrocketed in a similar rate as people became more accepting to it.
I reject that, but
The difference is that there's nothing cool about being left-handed. It's actually kind of lame. Loser. You know, but there is a little bit of that kind of coolness factor, I think you'd say, or trend factor to identifying as trans. Again, not everybody, I would say most people aren't. It's just some like kids doing it, and then they get a couple years older and they realize that they don't care anymore. Just let your kid experiment with their gender. If your kid's like, I'm non-binary, say, okay, whatever. Because then they're just going to probably go like, oh, they're going to get over it. If you tell them they can't be that, they're going to engage in just being oppositional, which kids do in general. So don't let them do just let them do it, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Let me ask you something. If that's the case, if more people are transitioning simply because it's more acceptable,
Well, that
then
part is
how
true.
can your side also say that there's a trans genocide happening? Those are completely
I didn't say
opposite.
that.
No, I know you didn't. But liberals say that all the time. They're saying that there's a trans genocide for some reason. So I'm just curious as to how you would square that.
I mean, listen, I've heard the trans genocide thing, never really bought into it. I think that there are still plenty of places that are uncomfortable for trans people, and maybe that's what they're referring to. You know, the lack of access that trans people get to medical care, or gender affirming care could cause them to take their own lives, and maybe you can consider that a genocide. But okay, sure.
Circle.
Can we define what the trans genocide, I guess, narrative is as raised by her?
I would like her to answer that because she's the one that brought it up.
Yeah, because
Fair.
so we hear people saying simply because legislation is being passed across the country that is banning minors from being able to transition, that automatically means that those children would commit suicide. And that is simply
Sure, I think it's a sensationalized argument. It does have a negative. It is negative for mental health to not be able to transition. Let's be very clear. If you need that as your treatment, and I think that's between like your doctor, your doctors, your kids, and the parents, of course. I do think that the narrative is a little sensationalized. I don't think it has to get that far. I don't think it has to get to the point where people are like, I want to take my own life. Sometimes it's just like if somebody's just really depressed to the point where they're not really able to function particularly well, you know, that's also a qualifier for somebody getting whatever treatment is that they need, whether it is gender affirming care or whatever else, or care for whatever other mental health issue that they might have.
Abusive statement in and of itself.
Statistically, a lot of minors who aren't able to transition, who would like to, do end up.
Why don't we have
That's
this?
not true.
Why don't we have
That's
this?
simply not true.
Why don't we have the same
Science is not there.
suicide rates?
I think it is. I just don't think it's. I think the suicidality goes up, of course, but
In the past that we why don't we have this?
Simply not
Why
true.
don't we have the same
Science is not there.
suicide rates in the past that we that if that was the case?
How could
what is that? I don't understand the question, to be honest with you.
how could we have known that the people who were committing suicide were transgender if they didn't feel safe to come out?
That's
When you look
fair.
at like members of each generation that identify as LGBTQ or in that community, it's like less than 2%. And then for some reason, as soon as we get to Generation Z, it's 20%.
Yeah, because most of them are just identifying as fucking bisexual. Like, who cares? It's understand that there's a difference between identifying as trans versus LGBTQ. Most of them are just identifying as bisexual, and then they're just not caring anymore. Like, honestly, if I was born today, or if I was born 15 years ago instead of 33 years ago, I'd probably be bisexual. When I was younger, like, I wasn't as okay to be gay. I always struggled with the thought, but I like fembussy. You know, I'd still probably consider myself straight nowadays, but you know what I mean? Like, I would have been bisexual if it was more acceptable. So I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I'm tired of being oppressed. I'm tired of being oppressed and not being able to tell you. Okay? I'm tired of it. I'm okay with it. All right? I'm a proud fembussy enjoyer. I'm not bisexual, though. I wouldn't consider myself that. All right?
Now, some of you may argue, okay, this is just because it's more open, it's more accepting now, everyone, it's okay to be that.
Whatever, dude.
But
Young
then in the
people are
same
just
beat,
experimenting with their
you guys will say
sexuality. Who cares?
that if you don't accept them, they're more likely to commit suicide or something. But
That's not what it's happened. There's a difference between LGBTQ people versus trans people, but okay.
kind of sounds like a double-edged sword.
So that didn't sound double-edged to me. It sounded pretty accurate. Like if you're not accepting of somebody, they're more likely to be self-hating. Like if you're telling somebody that they're not allowed to do something, they shouldn't do something, they're not fitting into their own body, especially experiencing dysphoria in itself.
It's crazy how prominent and in your face these conversations are, considering how few trans people there are. It's actually very interesting.
It's a mental battle in general. Like
So to clarify your point, I think you're saying that acceptance is what's leading to. Is that right?
it's a mixture.
I kind of like this new format though from Jubilee.
between self-acceptance, outer acceptance. It's a conversation between nature and nurture. Like
See, here's the problem with that. There's two longitudinal studies alone that I could cite. And
He's going to cite something from Sweden, 1973 to 2003. I fucking knew it. That study is 20 years old. It doesn't matter anymore. I knew he was going to go with the study from Sweden. When conservatives bring up the Sweden study that ended in 2003, understand that it doesn't matter. That is 20 years ago. When it comes to any science, especially newer science, when it comes to the conversation about trans people, it's a newer science. The stuff we knew last year is not going to be up to date. It's a new science. We're learning new stuff every single day. So for him to bring up the study, it doesn't matter. That study doesn't matter. That study isn't about gender dysphoria. That study is about gender identity disorder, which was phased out. One of the reasons, because gender identity disorder was overdiagnosed. That one doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It's a dated study. It's 20 years old on a very new science, a very new mental health science. It doesn't matter. There wasn't nearly the same mental health supports either when it came to those people transitioning. They were honestly overly affirmed. A lot of them were just people who were like gay or masculine women or gay or feminine men, and they decided that they were trans because we had a very shitty understanding of trans people, and there was no mental health supports. So that study is old, it's dated, and it's irrelevant. I hope somebody brings that up.
in Sweden from 1973 to 2003, they looked at a large number of subjects who had before transition and after transition, and they had worse comorbidities, they had worse mental health issues. Sweden is a very tolerant, liberal, progressive
It's 20 years old, dude.
country. A study this year, published in Denmark, 2023, 42-year longitudinal study,
I'm
and what they
interested.
found is that the mental health issues did not decline, they actually were augmented. It was worse for individuals who thought that by transitioning they would solve their mental health issues. It actually got worse.
I need to know what he's talking about. Denmark. Wow, that's a lot of words. Hold on.
Denmark, 2000.
Denmark, 2023.
23, 42-year longitudinal
42-year trans study. I have to know about this one. Okay, I'm going to assume that this is the right article. I want to look at this. We can read this together. A recent published study from Denmark compared the rate of suicide attempts, suicide-related deaths, and non-suicide-related deaths, and all-cause morbidity between non-trans and transgender identifying individuals. The study spanned 42 years. However, the average follow-up for transgender individual was less than 6 years. The study found that transgender identifying individuals in Denmark had significantly elevated rates of all 4 adverse outcomes. Wait, this is the study he's talking about. He's wrong. He's just lying. Wait, what? The study found that transgender identifying individuals in Denmark had significantly elevated rates of all 4 outcomes, which are increased just suicide-related and non-suicide related deaths. Okay, so he's cited. He doesn't know what he's reading. Okay. All right. The absolute risk of death by suicide among transgender. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Compared to the general population. Okay, which 7 to 8 times more like. Okay, there's 7 to 8 times more. They were 7 to 8 times more likely to attempt. 3.5 more times likely to die by suicide. Very sad. And twice likely to die from non-suicide. The study considered an individual to be transgender after they changed their legal sex markers or obtained gender-related diagnosis. It is unclear whether individuals with adverse outcomes have been treated with gender-affirming hormonal and surgical interventions. So they have absolutely no... They didn't even track to see if any of these people got gender-affirming care. What he's saying is wrong. What he's saying is wrong. That's not what this shows at all. They didn't even track to see if they got gender-affirming care. So none of the okay, this guy's. I don't think this guy knows how to read studies.
Longitudinal study, and what they found is that the mental health issues did not decline; they actually were augmented. It was worse for individuals
That's not
who
what this says.
thought that by transitioning they would solve their mental health issues. It actually got worse.
None of them got. They didn't even track whether those people got access to gender-affirming care. But okay.
It doesn't help. It doesn't solve these issues. It shows it's a contagion. That is the key word.
Let's pause there then. What are your guys' thoughts on
my thoughts are, let me do a quick Google search because this guy's literally pushing misinformation.
Let's say that's a pretty popular figure that's been mentioned when it comes to a social media influencer that has risen to fame because of that.
She's just doing what she's doing. I don't.
Who are we talking about?
Help. It doesn't solve these issues. It shows it's a.
I wish somebody could give pushback on that, but the people that come on there have no fucking idea what they're talking about. They don't know how to like speak negative. Like they don't know how to speak against these people that are just spouting misinformation. And that's why people believe it, because they don't have anybody on that's fucking equipped to be able to answer these questions, apparently.
Contagion. That is the key word.
Let's pause there then. What are your guys' thoughts on, let's say, that?
Are you talking about Blair White?
That's a pretty popular figure that's been mentioned when it comes to a social media influencer that has risen to fame because of that.
She's just doing what she's doing. I don't think that she's doing anything wrong.
Okay,
Do you think that has...
Oh, Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney. Okay.
Pronouns are she, her.
That's transphobic.
Do you think that has inspired trans kids?
I think she's
come on, bro.
also
What do you gotta be so
inspired
mean for, dude?
allies to see the human being behind the pronouns and the makeup and the dress, and to see that there's someone who is going through a story, and that watching her go through that story enabled us to see the humanity behind her.
He is degrading women. You see a great
Dylan Mulvaney is just a cringe person because they're a theater nerd. That's it. There's nothing negative about Dylan Mulvaney. She's just a trans person that's kind of cringe because they like theater. That's it.
disregard. I mean, look at the product that he was supposed to be promoting. It is fallen into.
Her pronouns are she, her.
And with all due respect,
to me,
it
like the
isn't
people who are
phobic to
following them
speak
are
the
y'all
truth.
and not the you.
You know what the question I would ask this guy on here? They don't ask the right questions. I would say, let me ask you a question, brother. Who would you rather fuck, me or Dylan Mulvaney? And he would be like, I wouldn't do that. I was like, but you had to choose life or death. God said you're not going to heaven unless you choose one of us to fuck. And let's see what he says. And then he'd probably be like, oh, if I had to choose Dylan Mulvaney, I'd be like, why, dude? Because you know that's a girl. I don't know what you want me to tell you, brother.
That's not a phobia.
Let's
Telling
stop
the
here.
truth is not a phobia.
Let's stop here
It's not a
and
mental
let's
illness.
go over to the undecided group.
Okay. I will say it's a little interesting and ironic that like it's just the truth. It's just the truth. But it's usually religious conservatives who are telling us what the truth is when it comes to trans people. But you guys I'm not trying to be rude. And you know, people get upset with me. This isn't meant to be disparaging of religious people, but understand that the side going facts over feelings for conservatives, religious people, you guys like believe in God, and that's awesome. But there's no proof that it exists in any capacity. So it's a little ironic that you're telling me that trans people can't exist because it doesn't make logical sense when you believe in you believe in God, who is like, hey, I'm going to kill everybody in the world except for one of every, you know, a boy and a girl of every animal, because they were kind of loud. But slavery, we're going to work on that one slowly. All right. We're just going to be like, hey guys, can you tone it down a little bit over the next couple 100,000 years? That was not, you know, being a little annoying. It's like, I'm gonna kill you all, but if you slavery, it's not so bad. It's like, what the fuck, man? Come on. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just saying. All right, dude. What are your thoughts?
So undecided group, you guys are kind of like the comment section. Which side did you resonate with most? Liberals or conservatives?
Or conservatives.
So why did you resonate most with the liberal group?
Trends pass. Trends end.
Okay.
So calling it a trend is saying that these people's identities are just going to go away. And I don't think that's fair. Why do you think that it's not transphobic to misgender?
Because the concept of misgendering is false. There are two sexes. There's male and female. Well,
Yeah, that's what it's the gender, right? So it's not called trans sex. It's called transgender. So
it's in the chromosomes. It goes beyond superficial or secondary characteristics. He is a male. He was born a male. He will remain a male.
yeah, Dylan Mulvaney is a male, but Dylan Mulvaney is a girl, right? As a woman. Male refers to your sex. Gender and sex are different, brother.
It doesn't matter how many chemicals he puts into his body or how many body parts are cut off. And I'll say this again. Telling the truth is not a mental illness.
Do you have a response to that?
Yeah.
Bro, go with the like. I don't understand. Nobody brings up religion in these conversations. Just go for it. That's what you got him on the fucking huge hypocrisy of his idea of accepting different things.
I think that there is a difference between sex and gender, and I know you're going to disagree with me, but transgender is its own thing, and she can be.
Oh, she got into her brain, dude.
See, no, don't try to blame that on me. You are using the wrong pronouns for this woman, and you're trying to influence something.
This is the problem. You let's be real here. Jubilee brought on some based bald guy that looks like Heisenberg that's confidently stating misinformation, like citing 20-year-old studies on trans people, even though this is a new science, it's updating like every year. And just completely misreporting another study that says that like transitioning doesn't help people, despite the fact that the study explicitly says that transitioning wasn't part of the study. They didn't even know if people were actually had access to gender affirming care, just studied people. But he's saying based shit. That's how people are going to interpret it. And then you got nobody to give like reasonable pushback on. All you got are people that are like, he's transphobic. That's not going to do anything to anybody. You can't just call somebody transphobic. You have to show them why what they're saying is wrong.
Do you have a specific question that you like to ask the liberal group?
I would just like to hear more from them because I feel like it was very one-sided.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, guys. Do we need you to walk
Okay.
the whole time?
So you sat more on the conservative side. Do you want to explain why you decided to
The bald guy's my dad.
come here?
Yeah, so I think, it is just factual that there are more people transitioning or at least coming out, not even just as transgender, but just, within the LGBTQ community as a whole.
True.
And so I do see, I think for me, it does become a little bit grayer when you start to say, okay, is that because people are being like influenced to transition, or is it because it's more accepting and people are feeling more open and safe about coming out? And I think, when you're in, a friend group or when you, associate with certain people, I think you are likelier to maybe, explore your gender a little bit more,
of course.
look more into those avenues. And I
1000%. He's not wrong about that at all.
think that can influence someone to transition if, maybe beforehand.
That part's not true though. Nobody's going to go through like an actual transition, like an actual like medical transition, because their friends are trans, right? Like you have to have access to, like that's gender affirming care. They might identify as like non-binary or gay or whatever, but they're not going to literally transition because of it. And if they do, then that's a failure on that therapist part for even allowing the diagnosis in the first place.
And that wouldn't have been a concern.
But we're at a point now where if a kid like looks up on WebMD all the symptoms of gender dysphoria, lies about it, goes to a therapist, gets affirming care, and then it makes them feel worse and they don't say anything and they don't stop. I mean, whose fault is it at that point? Like, I don't know what to tell you, you know?
Duration.
Do you have a specific question that you'd like to ask either side?
Yeah, I guess I would like to ask, the liberal side, and I can't necessarily trace it back to a specific time when this happened, but I do think we have seen recently, a rise in people identifying with genders that aren't necessarily within a binary. Would you say that's a rise? How would you, I guess,
Yeah,
account
of course.
for that? I think, as I said earlier, that is just accounted by survivorship bias. People previously were not comfortable enough with coming out, and that's where that difference comes from. And eventually, that skyrocketing rate will even out. I definitely do think
That part's probably true, yeah.
that is kind of a factor of it. That people are just coming out more and are feeling more accepted. And I absolutely do believe that that is a good that social media has done. But I do also kind of push back on the idea that it's just completely that. Like when you look at figures who rise to prominence, like for example Dylan Mulvaney,
Why didn't they redact that one?
these are people with huge platforms that are reaching to younger people who are at stages in their lives where they are exploring ideas of gender and gender expression and identity. And so I guess personally I would push back a little bit against the idea that it's just people who, had it been more accepting in the past, they would have come out. I do think there is a rise. I feel like the numbers just don't really account for it necessarily being just that group of people. I think there are people, especially youth, who are identifying more kind of on the gender spectrum or as transgender that maybe wouldn't have before.
So
Yeah, for sure, but there's nothing wrong with that, so it doesn't really matter as long as it's not like people. I would argue what the detransition rates are like 1%. All the available information we have tells us that the gender affirming care is the right way to go. Will that change in the future? Maybe. As again, it's a new science, absolutely. But like, what's wrong with a kid going, "I'm non-binary"? Nothing. It doesn't matter. I would wager that the overwhelming majority of people are not going to go through with gender affirming care if it's not good for them. So.
no, you're the only undecided. Can you clarify why you still remain undecided?
You told me
I
to.
think the reason I remained undecided
out.
was because although I appreciate the presentations of both sides and I see both their points, I was still a little bit unclear as far as what's like each opinion was on each side. So
Go.
I would just be
I swear to God, when it comes to like any of these conversations about any like political topic, when it comes to whether it's trans people or whatever, conservatives are always better at arguing their point than like liberals or progressives are, on almost like 99% of the time. And the reality is that the conservatives are wrong. But these progressives, they're never prepared to answer any question. It feels like you need to be prepared for typical conservative talking points when they say, oh, well, if it's not a social contagion, then why are 20% of youth LGBTQ or youth identifying as LGBTQ? It's like, well, most of them are bisexual. So they're not transitioning because they'll try to make it seem like they're transitioning, or they'll say like this other shit, like, oh, what about the study from Sweden that ended 20 years ago that says that gender affirming care doesn't work? It's like, well, that's 20 years old, and they didn't have the same robust mental health structures back then, and it was gender identity disorder, which was phased out partly because it was overdiagnosed. So it's like you're not ready for these talking points. All these progressives are just like, I was told that this was what I have to believe, so I believe it. And meanwhile, they get steamrolled in every goddamn conversation. They just don't know how to answer any questions. It's just because it's the prevailing narrative. So nobody has like an intelligent response to like half these problems, I feel like.
curious to ask the liberal side, is there any like evidence that you guys could present that would suggest that transitioning lowers the rate of suicide?
I would say on one hand,
Yeah, all the data that doctors are using. What are you talking about? Yes. Why do you think that they're intentionally using bad data? That's the question. That question is ridiculous. That is all the data that's being used now. What do you think that the medical institution is doing? Trying to misdiagnose people? Now you're engaging in a conspiracy, and so it's like, I don't know how to talk to you. You know what?
There is data that suggests that trans minors who are not able to medically transition when they do want to, their suicidality attempt rate is around 40%, and that drops to below 10% when they are able to transition.
Interesting. I'm looking.
Moreover, if I wasn't able to transition and I didn't have any support in my life, I would probably kill myself.
Damn, harsh.
The conservatives, you guys were discussing social media contagion. Could you present any other arena as far as other instances where we've seen social media have that influence on?
I'd love to add just every aspect of mainstream media. So CNN, like all mainstream news sources, when we talk about even like major corporations, we have Pride Month, for God's sake, right? We have an entire.
Hold on, I want to hear. I just want to hear the question again. All right,
the conservatives, you guys were discussing social media contagion. Could you present any other arena as far as other instances where we've seen social media have that influence on?
I'd love to add just every.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Every aspect of mainstream media. So
You would just use that. So I think she's asking like any instances of other instances of this happening. Like, yeah, just the news in general. The fact, I don't know, like the new, like information out there has a pretty big impact on people. I just think the term social contagion tries to make it seem like it's so negative, but it's just people believing a thing because it's popular. Like that's really what it boils down to. It's like people who like Travis Kelce. Like that's basically what it is. Now Swifties love Travis Kelce because Travis Kelce's dating Taylor Swift. It's relevant, new, interesting information. That's all it is. Like social contagion. And people are going to stop caring about him once they break up and she writes a song about how he fucking abused her or whatever.
So CNN, like all mainstream news sources, when we talk about even like major corporations, we have Pride Month for God's sake, right? We have an entire month where all corporations, all major corporations, even the government, you know, President Joe Biden is putting a pride flag. It seems like every aspect of our like top dog, like main people in society are promoting it, right? And then if you go down to like social media, everyone's promoting it, right? Each Instagram, or not, maybe not Twitter anymore, or X now, but TikTok. There's trends, there's things that are happening where it is being promoted. And the fact that there's influencers, I think, is just proving the fact that it is indeed a trend.
Part of it can be. Again, it doesn't make all of it a trend.
Gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
It is.
I believe that it is still classified under the DSM-5 as one. So sure, yes, technically. But the problem is that people will weaponize that and they'll say, well, because you have something in the DSM-5, it's a mental illness, and they use that to invalidate you. I'm pretty sure ADHD is also DSM. Is also in the DSM-5. Yep. So, but you wouldn't invalidate somebody with ADHD or with autism by saying, well, you have a mental illness. The fact that it's in the DSM-5, the only reason that exists is because we need to have diagnosis criteria to properly treat people. So the fact that it might or may be a mental illness is, first of all, socially constructed because we can call it whatever we want. We can call it like a fucking sexual health condition, which I think is they're trying to do in the World like Health Organization. It's just all that we really need is a diagnosis, something on paper that can be studied so that we can give proper treatment. Like it doesn't really matter. People will use it disparagingly. They'll say, "Oh, if you have gender dysphoria, it's a mental illness. Blah, blah, blah. That's why it's invalid." Is it? No, that doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't say the same thing about people with autism or people with ADHD. You would go, "Oh, we need to treat them the way that they need to be treated." So yeah.
Is a break with reality. I'll start at where I've said before. There are two sexes. It's determined not just by external characteristics, but by chromosomes. When somebody dies and is buried, and 400 years later, if they exhume the body and they test those bones, they're going to see that it's an XX or an XY.
Yeah, for sure. That's 100% true what he's saying. But also, if you dig somebody up 1,000 years from now and you look at their body, you're not going to know what kind of a person that they were in any capacity unless you looked at their writing. And that's a conversation about the separation between mind and body. And one thing that's always very interesting to me is that all of us, conservatives, progressives, everybody, we've been having conversations about who is and isn't a real man or is and isn't a real woman for the entirety of time. And you're going to say, that's not true. Yes, it is. It's one simple question. Do you think a man that rapes a woman is a real man? And you'd say, no, of course not. Biologically, it's a male, but that person from a philosophical sense, it's not a man. Right? We remove, being a man or being a woman from people based on the heinous acts that they engage with. So why can't we include people that are good people? It's really not that big of a deal. Like it doesn't really matter. Like who's more of a man to you, or who's more of a woman to you, Dylan Mulvaney or Casey Anthony? You know what I mean? Like simple question, and then based on how you answer that, it will tell me what kind of a shitty person you are, whether you're a good or a bad person.
Male or a female. It's a mental issue, and you want to treat it that way. You treat it with counseling, with therapy, reflecting reality, helping the person to be comfortable with the sex that they're born with.
That's in effect. Some people that works, but it's not effective. It's more effective to help that person transition, or to provide gender affirming care to the degree that they need. Like just to be clear, like you're obviously not a doctor, so yeah. What you're saying doesn't have positive impacts. So just so he knows those.
Sex.
What do you guys think about that? It's calling it a mental illness.
Yes, I want to respond to your comment about bones and skeletons. I study bioanthropology, and actually they're moving in a direction where they're using terminology like assumed or estimated gender, because there is large overlap between the general sort of estimations. Also, no one's going to dig up someone's bones unless they've already consented to donating their skeleton somewhere. No one just goes grave robbing for that.
But that's
I don't think this is the way that you would attack this problem. I think that I think that like I feel like there's so many subpar answers. I feel like my answers are better. Not to be rude, but I think that my answers are better for conservatives to hear. Like, I wish I was on these shows, truthfully.
Let's hear a little bit.
The point
It's
is,
irrelevant to bring it up then.
no, it is relevant to point out that sex is determined at birth and it doesn't change.
But what's the point you're making with the skeleton example?
The point that it doesn't change even over long periods of time.
I'd like to hear a little bit more from
Thank you for your
both
help
of
with
you.
that.
If you're walking around life
God,
constantly
this guy's
being
so
told
angry.
something like what you're supposed to identify as and you feel other than, like, of course, as time goes on, you're going to feel worse and worse about that specific thing.
I don't think there's a reason to transition if you don't have a mental illness. Like, there's something wrong in
That's
your
like
brain.
saying you shouldn't cut your hair because you don't
No.
want long
Well,
hair.
no, what they're saying is true. Like, there's no reason to transition unless you have a diagnosis. Again, the term mental illness just sounds bad because people will use it as a pejorative sense. They'll use it as a negative with a negative tone on it, generally speaking. But guys, that's actually unironically ableist. There's nothing wrong with having a mental illness or a mental disorder, right? You're just somebody that needs help getting treated with something. I wish that they would focus on that. It's like, well, the word sounds bad, but it really isn't. It just means that you have a diagnosis for something that you can get treatment for.
Wow, that is so not a comparison.
So when you
off topic.
I mean when I
was a
when
bad- it was a bad
it's
comparison.
the opposite concept of gender or body dysmorphia. So when you look in the mirror and you see what's wrong with, like, you have an uncomfortability with your secondary sex characteristics, and so the treatment is to change that to match with what you want it to be. But I mean, he's right. You can't change your sex. But it's in the brain. You treat the body to help the brain. It's not any different. And honestly, I'm somebody who I don't think we should stigmatize mental illness. That's the whole point is,
Dude, the fucking conservative the conservative person, it has better arguments defending the progressives than the fucking progressives. This is embarrassing for all these. Because I know that Jubilee's not doing it on purpose. Jubilee has no stake in the game. They just like to put conversations out there. They're not biased in any direction. They just bring out people who will talk. But I feel like time after time after time, they bring on like the worst fucking people, like terrible defenders for trans people. I feel that way, honestly.
I have anxiety, PTSD from when I was in the military and everything else. I don't think we should be stigmatizing mental illnesses. And so I think that calling it for what it is just accepting that, and it actually helps with treatment and to what you're treating, because you're treating the brain. You have to go to a therapist. You have to go all of that. So I think it's no issue to call it.
And when you treat the brain, you don't cut the body, though. I mean, if somebody...
Yeah, you do. You might. It depends on what's going on there. But yeah, sometimes you have to cut into the body to treat the brain. I mean, okay.
has bulimia or anorexia, you treat the reason why they perceive themselves incorrectly. If somebody has dysmorphia, you don't say, well, just cut off a body part.
Well, no, but that's different, right? We don't treat based on affirming people. We treat based on what the highest proximity to life and happiness is. So when it comes to somebody that has that's anorexic, if you allow them to not eat and feed into the idea that they're overweight when they're not, they'll die. If you provide a trans person with gender affirming care, they don't. That's the entire difference of the entire situation. That's why those two things aren't the same. I think that people should understand that as well. But yeah, like there's people that want breast implants because they have some kind of a distress associated with the way that their body looks. That's fine. Nobody cares about that. There's some people who take steroids. Frankly, I don't give a shit. Like, I don't give a fuck if you want to take steroids to look better. People will augment their body all the time to make themselves feel better. People get tattoos. People get piercings. These things are incredibly they logically make no sense to get, but people like to have things change on their body to make them look different, to make them feel better. You know, some people get haircuts. I don't have any fucking hair, dude. It's fucking crazy.
But this is a complete violation of the Hippocratic Oath.
Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition, and the treatment for this condition is to do a medical transition if that person chooses to have those procedures done. It won't go away with just a simple pill. It's gender dysphoria. It has nothing to do with sex and bones and your DNA.
Do you think children are capable of making that decision?
Maybe not children. The teenagers, possibly. Yeah, maybe it's possible. Teenagers might be able to make that decision. The problem is it's not like we're just having teenagers make the decision. When you say, are teenagers capable of making a decision? Well, not by themselves, probably not. I mean, we know that like teenagers can make some decisions of like who they want to be boyfriend and girlfriend with or other things. Children can consent to some things, just not like sex with adults. And so with the kids, with these teenagers, because no child is getting a surgery, right? No no preteen is getting a surgery. I think the youngest recorded is like 15, which I think is inappropriate for any like top surgery anyway. But my point is that it's teenagers. With the help of their parents and medical professionals, they can make an informed choice. And based on the statistics that we have right now, that is the correct choice overall. So just to be very clear, I feel like, and this is something my wife had said on our Rob and Dan podcast, is that it's interesting the way that we talk about like young people nowadays. I feel like adults treat young people as too young and they infantilize them and they don't give them enough credit for what they're capable of at an age appropriate time. But then when it comes to kids themselves, they try to mature themselves too fast. So you have the force of like young people wanting to be older than they actually are, while you have like older people trying to make young people younger than they actually are. And I feel like we're not hitting the mark on how we should be treating people in general, of like, okay, what's the appropriate way to treat people at this age?
Let me pose a question. Homosexuality actually used to be considered as a mental illness.
Sure.
Do you think there's any correlation here with what's going on currently with the trans movement?
It has to.
Maybe a little bit, yeah. I think that obviously there is a significant difference between being gay and trans. I mean, you need a lot more robust supports as a, dude, are you really killing? You need more robust supports as a trans person than as a gay person. But yeah, like there's fundamentally the lack of societal acceptance sure is very similar, and lack of understanding and chastising that thing, and illogically removing supports, because that is what's happening. It's the illogical removal of medical access, because all the data we have shows that this transition is correct. So
to do with the way you present yourself. And again, I call it sex dysphoria because it's dysphoria of your sex, but it has to do with your secondary sex characteristics that you're presenting to society. In a lot of regards, and even Deborah So wrote this in End of Gender, she actually advocated for this because the same hormone imbalance in the womb that causes more, femininity and homosexuality seems to be very similarly tied to gender dysphoria as well.
Could be, sure.
It's just it's a further step along the way. It's a further,
Yeah, that's one of the things that will dictate you being gay, is there is a genetic factor, but a lot of it's hormone washing in the womb. If you look at the data, for every male that a woman has, like a mother has, the higher chance for that kid to be gay, because there seems to be some kind of like hormone washing in the womb that has an impact on your sexuality. And like, yeah, I could see that having an impact on your gender as well. I think it's a very complicated issue, but usually gay men are very feminine. Typically they're feminine. And so I could see some kind of something happening in your life that might push you, or not necessarily push, could push you to be trans, or, there might be a lot of older gay men that just didn't feel like that was an option. So they just consider themselves gay. At the end of the day, you meet people where they're at based on just where they're at. And that's why the therapist sits down and talks to them and makes sure that they're making the correct decision.
Condition. And I agree, where I use mental illness and mental health condition synonymously, essentially.
So I think what's interesting about this topic is that, we need to consider both statistics as well as personal anecdotes. If you guys don't mind, do you want to share a little bit about your personal experiences with this particular topic?
Yeah, so I didn't even know that trans people existed until I was around like 19, I think. That information never came to me. I'm 25 right now. I didn't really realize I was trans until I was 22. And I started medically transitioning when I was 23. I've experienced depression for most of my life, probably since I was like 13 or so, and a lot of suicidal ideation throughout high school and early in college. But pretty much around the time I had, felt comfortable with my, where I'd gone in transitioning, that had largely decreased pretty much entirely.
And this is what's interesting, because I know when we talk about a lot of this stuff, every transsexual that I know that we started feeling dysphoria around
This guy's an uncomfortable person on the left here, not this trans woman, this actual guy. He's a very uncomfortable person. He's just weird.
Very time that we became self-aware around the age of 4 years old. But yeah, I knew around the age of 4 that there was something different. I wanted to be the opposite sex. I knew I wasn't the opposite sex, but it was something that I wished, I could. I knew that there was something different. And I tried to dress on it 4 years old and went from there, and then transitioned later in life when, I finally accepted it myself.
I'd be
Cool.
curious to hear your perspective as someone, I think you mentioned that you have kids that have
Yes.
transitioned.
Yes, I have that magical uterus. My third child came out at 11 and told us that he was a boy. He was assigned female at birth. And so he socially transitioned, obviously, because he was only 11. He is now an 18-year-old college university student and thriving. And then my youngest child came out as a trans girl at the age of 15. So
Interesting.
I live this
I know people are going to probably question, like, well, how come so many of your kids are trans? And there probably is like a genetic factor to that. I do wonder, though. Oh, as long as they're happy.
with my children.
I mean, I guess it makes the most sense. I mean, you'll have, like, I feel like there'll be families that'll have football players or good athletes in them. There's probably there's a genetic and environmental factor there as well, of course. So, yeah, cool. Interesting.
Made the trek to the emergency room with a suicide attempt and a suicide plan with each of my children.
Did at any point,
Could be a similar phenomenon to multiple on how multiple siblings end up on the spectrum. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like what place my wife works with people with IDD or in the IDD community, like there's a lot of people where parents will have like multiple kids with different degrees of like autism or Down syndrome or something. So there could be genetic factors, and then it also potentially environmental factors. You know, it's interesting. It's rather interesting, guys. That's the only little point that I'm making.
did your opinion on this is a gender dysphoria or a mental illness change as you've had actual kids that has transitioned?
My opinion hasn't changed. It's a mental health condition, but antidepressants weren't working. Before Mitchell came out, we tried everything. We'd been to every single therapist, and nothing was touching it until we used he/him pronouns. And that was all it took to make things better for him initially. And then we did the medical transition.
I don't even know where to start here.
Hey, listen. The literal doctor said this is the right way to go. I mean, who the fuck am I?
It's like sex, again, sex is not assigned at birth. It's established at conception. We have to get to biology here.
Yeah, nobody's contesting that. Nobody's contested that, Arthur.
And the second thing is, we're seeing like this move. I mean, you were mentioning the academic setting. Notice how the academic terms are changing, but this is a result of pressure. This is
I mean, terms change all the time. What does it matter?
a result of societal
We stopped using slurs because terms changed,
pressure.
It's
That's what
science.
happened with homosexuality, by the way. Homosexuality was recognized as unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah, it's not unhealthy.
Now, whether you call it a mental illness or
This guy thinks that being gay is wrong. Push him on that. Make him. This is one of the things you have to do. Push this guy. He thinks that, like, you could tell by his language that he thinks that being gay is bad. Push him on that. Push him on that. It'll make people be like, oh, that's unreasonable. Push him.
or a deviant behavior or destructive behavior, that's a point of debate. It's an unhealthy behavior for sure, and certainly it's the case with transgenderism.
See, he thinks it's unhealthy. Why is it unhealthy to be gay? You could ask him. Because this guy loves cock. That's the thing. He's suppressed it, though, so much that he's asexual now.
Somebody cutting off healthy body parts. We have seen numerous detransitioners now coming forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There are detransitioners. We should listen to every detransitioner, but the reality is that they're in the minority of a minority of people.
They had severe health and mental problems like the ones that you've talked about.
Sure.
But we find that I have a friend, Kevin Witt. He's an outspoken activist. He's been on commercials to protect children from sex mutilation.
Right, but that's not what is happening, right? You're actually hurting children. So just to be
He was abused as a kid. He was beaten by his dad. He was molested by older kids when he was in school. He struggled with identity issues. These are horrific traumas that he endured, and not once did a counselor ever address those deeper issues.
Then that's just bad counselors. Like, that's just bad counselors if they didn't address those deeper issues. Sure. I mean, but here's the thing. That person might have an identity issue because they were assaulted so much, and it's horrible. Or that person might have been assaulted because they have identity issues. People say, no, that's not true. It does make sense. I'm not saying it is one or the other. I'm saying it's an interesting conversation to have. Because people, especially, like, I would argue that people who are different, kids who are different, you could tell intuitively. Kids can tell. Like, I remember when I was like 12 years old, I told my uncle that his son was gay. His son was 4. Guess what? He has a gay boyfriend now. You can tell. And if you have a society that doesn't like gay people and they identify a gay kid, then guess what? That kid's going to get bullied, and they're going to be othered. They're going to be ostracized. They're not going to be cared for as much, and they're going to be more susceptible to harm. So it's something to consider.
That's what needs to be happening.
Now let's actually hear from the undecided group. So undecided group, which side do you resonate with more?
The side that's more handsome.
So why did you choose the liberal side?
I do think it's a mental health condition. I don't like calling it an illness. Everyone has things they don't like about their bodies. I don't think we're calling everyone mentally ill. It's
Like my
interesting
tiny
how you
wiener.
brought up conception and saying that gender is decided at conception because
Sex is a term. That's what I said, not gender. I said sex.
sex, sorry.
Oh yeah, nobody disagrees with you, so that's cool.
Sex is decided at conception because
Established.
established, okay. Someone very close to me is trans, and so hearing it from people who identify as trans themselves, you can talk about statistics and facts all day, but if you actually listen to people and what they're going through and their experience, I feel like it's just much deeper.
Okay.
You were on the undecided in the previous prompt, but now it seems like you went on the conservative side.
I did.
What changed and what argument spoke to you most?
To my knowledge, the American Psychological Association still categorizes gender dysphoria as a
think it
mental
does.
illness.
Yeah.
So just to stay on the side of facts, and at this time, what the experts are categorizing as, I'm going to obviously side with that side.
I feel like science is always changing its definitions,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
We
Yeah.
used to drill heads and sides to fix migraines.
I think that one mother of the trans kids had the best argument, and that was that. Oh fuck! I forget. I literally had a brain fart in the middle of saying what I just. But I remember she had a better. Oh, it doesn't matter. The classification needs to be destigmatized. I believe that she had said that, as well as me. So
I'm curious if that will change your mind if that classification was taken away.
Well, to my knowledge, I think the American Psychological Association does intend to later categorize it under neurodivergence rather than mental illness, but it's also something that needs to be treated. When people with gender dysphoria go into get the diagnosis, they do have to go to a psychologist and get a prescription and this sort of stuff, so it's part of the process. So I understand that science is constantly an evolving field of study, but as to what we know now, I think I'd rather just stay safe and stay with what the facts say.
Do you feel
with the what?
like if they are to medically transition, that they need to go through a series or rounds of different psychiatric tests?
Well, in the case of children, I think that would be necessary just because I know in some cases it can be reversible, but this is a life-changing decision.
So you brought up the word life-changing.
Yeah, for sure, and that's the point, though, right? Like, that's the point of it, is to be life-changing. Like, nobody's getting gender-affirming care because it's not life-changing. They're looking for it to change their life. Again, it's about the misdiagnosis and making sure that it goes the right way. And I understand the hesitance when it comes to young people transitioning, because that could be scary, especially if you misdiagnose.
Right? I'm curious if there's any question that you'd like to ask either side, because that seems to be the big stipulation in this kind of debate here.
Well, I guess I would like to ask the liberals, did you see in your own lives vast improvements? What did that look like, the vast improvements that you saw?
My mental health was just largely improved. I was having a much easier time, I guess, making friends because I was more confident in my own identity.
My children's lives changed completely. It was like turning on a light switch. They brightened, they were more social, they excelled in school again after failing. They just completely transformed their lives.
Okay, that's very interesting.
You were on the conservative side, and now you're
That's the same way I feel when they allowed me to identify as a pro gamer.
back on the undecided. You guys flip-flopped here. What's something that kind of brought you back into the middle here?
Yeah, I would say, I guess my main reason for being here is that I just am unclear as to I guess the difference between something being a mental illness or mental condition. I know some people in the conversation said that they use them interchangeably.
It's just used because it sounds nicer. It's less it's less derogatory, you would say. People, that's pretty much it.
Some people said that they prefer to use the term mental condition rather than illness. I guess what kind of differentiates those things, if anything?
I think you just hit the nail on the head there. Changing the name of something doesn't change the fundamental reality that there's a
fucking
problem,
trolling me.
there's a mental health issue that the person has.
Yeah, sure. There's a mental health issue. We all have mental health issues. Doesn't mean that it's not valid.
It's a disorder. It's a break from reality. That's just a fact. The person is born male or female and thinks that they should be something else. Now, regardless of how that one treats that, the fact is, and I would submit, even from the comments from the liberal side, they recognize that it's an illness that needs to be treated.
I recognize that it needs
Yeah.
treating, but it's not a break from reality. That's
Yes,
a
it is.
psychosis.
psychosis is a break from reality.
Arthur,
Exactly.
let her talk. Arthur, let him talk.
A psychosis is a break from reality.
Which is a mental illness.
Gender dysphoria is not a psychosis.
But it is a break from reality because the person thinks they should be something else.
I think it's pretty clear. It's a disconnect between reality. You're born male, you're born female, but then your brain.
Just again, ask any of these people about their religious beliefs. I mean, honestly, ask any of them about their religious beliefs. That's all you need to do. It's not logical. It's not, well, do you believe in God? Yeah. That's not logical. Yes, it is. And they'll just like, okay, so if we can all as a society accept religious people, believe in God, and allow them a place to exist, why can't we do the same thing for trans people? There's more evidence that trans people exist than fucking God exists. So, like, okay, cool. Like, I don't understand.
Is saying something else. The cool thing about this entire debate is that liberals for once agree that there's possibly a soul, right? They say, you know, I was born male or female, but something deep down, something in me is I'm actually this. I'm actually this. Reality is what is physical. And so if you are physically or biologically male or female, you don't need to change your body, you need to change what you're thinking.
Okay, let's go back to the undecided.
Yeah.
Did somebody give this guy shit for his religion? Holy fuck. This guy teased on it. This guy like touched on it. By his logic, he's like, you finally recognize that there's a soul and an internal experience. And then he just floundered around until he moved on from the point. Because it's a bad point. Like, it's not actually a bad point. It's just like it doesn't agree with him. It's a bad point for him.
Help clarify, or is there any additional questions that bring up?
I guess it kind of did. You know, when I think of like a mental illness, it is something that like we treat. And so I guess in that regard, I don't know if it's necessarily a position. I mean, I feel like, you know, we do talk about, you know, people who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, like you treat that with some, I think in many cases, I don't know if it's all the time. I'm sure it's not all the time. But in the majority of the cases, you treat that with some kind of transition, whether it's a medical or a social or both. And so, I mean, I see kind of that definition. I feel like, but I mean, my takeaway is that I feel like they both kind of agree with that. And I don't know necessarily that I think it's a politically charged definition. I think it's like obviously how you interpret it and like what is treatment, what is proper treatment, you know, what is included within a mental illness, what isn't. But I guess my takeaway I think is like, I think we, or at least the conversation, the people in the conversation, I think they agree a lot more on kind of the general topic itself than maybe they might realize. But of course, when you get to nitty gritty, I think that's where you get the division.
The medical community is pushing gender transitions for financial gain.
No, of course not. That's silly. Listen, if you think that there is a financial incentive in our system that is encouraging people to be trans, then this is a conversation about how broken our system is, not about trans people. And it's interesting that in so many different facets, we will identify and discover that our issues with, you know, trans people are really issues with our broken system. Oh, they're pushing transitioning onto people for money. Okay, well, why is our healthcare so for profit in the first place? Oh, I'm uncomfortable with trans people being in locker rooms. Well, I remember being in locker rooms when I was a kid, and I was uncomfortable getting, you know, undressed in front of other guys. And it's like, okay, I mean, you know, maybe we need to start looking at some of the structures and systems that exist already and go like, you know, maybe there is a problem with them in general that's kind of has nothing to do with trans people in the first place.
So I disagree. I mean, when I started going through my process of transitioning, I didn't feel pushed by any medical professional at all. There were, in fact, quite the opposite, a lot of hurdles and just like bureaucratic red tape sections I had to like work through. But it's not something that I think, in my experience, was pushed onto me at least.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I started my transition, it took over a year just for me to get to my third doctor's appointment for us to actually like talking about.
I think I understand why they brought these people on now. I think that the two of them are trans, are very well passing, and I think that's kind of the point to make you like, oh shit, they're trans. Like, oh, maybe trans people are valid. I think that's kind of the intuitive thing or the subconscious thing you're supposed to experience.
They weigh things, and as far as cost goes, my insurance covered everything.
But they are still getting paid. Just the government or somebody else is paying them.
I mean, in comparison.
Well, why would you defend that? Do you think that the fact that like somebody gets paid does nothing to do with it? We're talking about is there a conspiracy out? That's the question. So
into a BBL,
you're trans.
Well, yeah. So here, but they're still getting paid and they're still getting financial. I actually think there's three different types of doctors. I think that there are people that are going out there and doing it for financial gain. We saw it in Vanderbilt. We saw it in so many other instances where they are doing it. We also see that they are manipulating the system. That's why we have a lot of detransitioners right now, and that's why
we don't have a lot of detransitioners. We don't have a lot of detransitioners. Proportionally, there's like less than 1%, and it's not even all because of misdiagnosis. Some of it's because they just want to stop taking medication, so that because they're happy with where they're at in their transition. That is a factor. or they might not have the enough robust supports in their own life. It's not all like, oh, everybody's misdiagnosed. A lot of detransitioning is not misdiagnosis. It's lack of financial or emotional support. It might be because you want to have kids. It could be because you're happy with where you are, so you stop taking hormones so that you don't like progress further, become more masculine or feminine. What are you talking about? There's no proof there. Us seeing detransitioners at a less than 1% rate doesn't show us that there's like all this wild medical conspiracy. What the fuck are you talking about?
We're seeing that community grow is because they're manipulating patients. They're manipulating.
This is just there's no logical foundation to this claim.
Parents, and so the third is, I don't know if it's ineptitude or if it's incompetence or laziness, but I think that there is a section. There's a group of mental health providers who simply right now we want to cure everything with a pill. And so we see this not only in the trans community, but we see this in the SSRI community. We see this, everybody's being.
So this point just doesn't make any sense. And here's the thing. I think that we should be use as few medications as possible. But the problem is if you're experiencing an issue, you need to get that treated first before you can really make a change. And like for me, being overweight, right? Like I need to lose weight. If I'm not on my medication, I don't have the energy to lose weight. Having diabetes is not good for you. Obviously, it lowers your energy. It is unhealthy for you. You need to start with medication, and then ideally you would come off that medication at some point. So, like, you need to kind of have a mixture of both, really. You start with hormones to the point that you need it, and even if you can, not everybody can get off of medication either. Not everybody is that fortunate to be able to do that.
Input onto something, and we're not really treating the root causes. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing a high comorbidity of like autism in the community. A lot of people that have autism are getting sucked into this, and they're not.
It's getting sucked in. No. There is a high comorbidity. That doesn't mean that they're getting sucked in. That just means that people with autism have a different perception of the world and their gender.
Not being treated for the autism, they're treating for gender dysphoria.
This person is noticing things and then it's making absolute claims like, oh, there's people with autism. There is a high comorbidity with autism and gender dysphoria, so they must be getting manipulated. Okay, or they have a different association with the world and they have a different association with their gender. I'm not saying and either of these are a fact. What I'm saying is that this person is absolutely claiming that there is a medical conspiracy theory. So what do you think, that like you're the only one that got away, that you're just like okay, but everybody else isn't? It doesn't really make sense the way that you talk about this shit.
So one thing to consider, and I did research on this, is that apparently based on top or bottom surgeries, it can actually range from around $10,000 to $25,000 from male.
It's more expensive for like feminizing surgeries than masculinizing surgeries, just to be clear.
So to female transitions to female to male transitions. And I think what both sides can probably agree on is that America is a for-profit healthcare industry, right? We don't have universal healthcare.
Yeah, and
anything to consider there.
So with the
socialized medicine,
with the Vanderbilt situation, she actually said because of Obamacare, they have.
Vanderbilt is like not closing. Just to be clear, like Vanderbilt had some issues, and now they are going to reopen after some like changes. People go on about how there's a big conspiracy with the Vanderbilt, but there isn't.
Have to pay for it. And so they are forcing insurance companies to pay for it. So it became a big moneymaker, was her specific phrase that she said.
I just want to remind everyone that there are international standards of care, and there are many countries out there that have social medicine, and it's not all for profit.
Argentina and Denmark apparently are one of the two countries that has included, I believe, transitioning for minors in their private and public healthcare plans.
Yeah, I mean, it should, if that's what the doctors are telling us. I mean, those are the people. I'm gonna listen. I want to hear football from somebody who is a professional football player. You know what I mean? Like you want to hear the experts on particular topics. I'm not going to a doctor to ask about fucking footballs. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? So.
I'd like to comment, but I want to give you a chance first.
No, it's kind of hard to draw intentions completely with these kinds of things. I completely agree with you that America is a for-profit country, and so regardless of what trend or what surgery is getting popular, they're going to find a way to make money out of it.
Yeah, America is a for-profit and everything, but an EpiPen costs a whole lot more than testosterone does. So even with that, and we're once again the push for being trans in medical societies, as far as our experience goes, doesn't really exist because two people here are saying that it was quite the opposite. It took significantly longer for anything to happen, significantly longer to try to do anything, significantly longer than, as far as like cosmetic surgeries or anything like that goes. So.
I need to point out, Big Pharma makes big money off of butchering little boys and girls.
No, they don't. Listen, like if you don't care about that, you don't care. First of all, you don't care about kids because then you'd be for some kind of gun control or something in those capacities. If you truly cared about children, you'd be a lot more in favor of healthcare. You'd be a lot more in favor of gun control because that is the number one killer of kids 1 to 19. It's a virtue signal. Like, you're uncomfortable with it and you don't want to reference the facts, so you get like really uncomfortable and go like, this should be banned, even though you have no fucking idea what you're talking about. That's really what it comes down to.
There is big money to be made in this. Follow the money.
If you cared, you would be like, oh, there's big money to be made in all of it. We need to fix all of it. You just care about trans people because it's disgusting to you. That's it. That's all it is. I know some of my audience is going to cry if they get this far and they're saying, oh, I had to turn this off. You're so dumb. Come into the stream and like make yourself look fucking stupid because you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I mean, we're at that point now. Be like, Papa, I disagree with you trans people. And then I can make you, I'm not going to make you look like shit. I'm just going to talk to you and I'm going to show you why you're like wrong and I'm right and you're fucking dumb. Like, this will be clear, okay? Just do it.
Ted Hidako, he's a father who's been fighting very hard because he's in a fraught divorce. His son was being put through the transitions. He saw in his medical bills $200,000 for the chemical treatments alone. We could talk about the Jeff Younger situation. Jeff is trying to fight to save his son. Now his ex-wife has taken the son here to transition him to try to become a girl. Not only are
right, so in that instance, from what I understand, it's like the kid has a diagnosis and the dad is trying to prevent the diagnosis of getting the treatment. So that's not good. Thank you so much for the 8-month sub. I love you, Papa Goat. Thank you so much, schoolboy Pookie.
The medical costs being put upon him, but also legal costs.
So to your point, though, so what we saw out of the whistleblower out of St. Louis, who is a self-identified queer woman who's married to a trans man, and she blew the whistle on what's going on there. Now, where I hear a lot of adults in this situation say that it was a long process for you, that's not what we're hearing from detransitioners and a lot of these patients, and that's not what the St. Louis whistleblower said. She said they were basically...
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the question is like, I mean, there should be a proper process. But I mean, how long should the process be? When you comes to any other issue that you have, you get diagnosed and then they treat you immediately. If you have cancer, they don't make you wait 3 years to get cancer medication treatment. Same thing with ADHD, same thing with autism, same thing with everything. Once you get a diagnosis, the assumption is that the diagnosis is correct, and it usually is. And then you start getting treated. So why would that change for gender dysphoria? I agree that there needs to be certain parameters to get diagnosed. But why would you need to wait a long time to get treatment? Why makes that any different than any other condition? It doesn't. There's nothing different. I don't understand.
Basically, pencil whipping psychologist letters so that they could start Myers on transition.
Right, but you don't know that at all. And based on detransition rates, that's not supported because it's less than 1%. So
why I think that clinic is also closing.
I mean, once again, for me,
the clinic is reopening, just to be clear. Like, there were some issues with it, and it's reopening. So they're talking about like Tavistock or whatever. So just to be clear, that's objectively true.
I'm always going to go on personal experience before I go on stats because there are too many trans people specifically.
And I don't even think it's closed yet, but
who don't get accounted into those statistics. So it's hard for me to be like, yes, this number and yes, this number. You know, whatever. But for me, it's like it took 1.5 years of therapy for me and my therapist who was
I also feel like that kind of makes sense. Like, the people who are not truly trans had a really quick process and didn't work for them. And then the people who are trans, it was long but successful. Yeah, sure. I mean, I imagine the people that are getting misdiagnosed and mistreated, though, they would probably come off of medication pretty quickly for the most part because they're like, oh, this isn't working. But
also trans, to go through that process and write that out for me to be comfortable or me to be, you know, whatever it may be to get what I needed. So and on top of that, the money situation, there's so many trans people who can't afford to transition, whether they're on insurance or not. So for me,
other people are paying for it.
What other people?
Well, not really, because our government is shit, but our healthcare is shit. But who cares?
Medicare, Medicaid. My goodness, right. This was a discussion in Wyoming.
Let's stop it here, and we'll ask them.
Medicare and Medicaid aren't widely accessible to everybody, but okay.
Undecided group. Okay, undecided group. Let's hear about which side that you resonate with more, liberals or conservative.
Bro, put me on one of these fucking things, please.
You started off in the undecided, then conservative, and now the liberal.
Yeah.
You've been all across the spectrum.
All over the place.
Let's hear about what kind of resonated with you more to switch sides this time.
I'm sure and confident that there are practitioners out there who are pushing people to transition, who are just signing off on prescriptions because, yes, I mean, you know, like the points were made, that there is money to be made, of course. But I don't know that I'd go as far as to say that there is this, like, I think someone mentioned it on the liberal side, that there's like a conspiracy going on. I don't think that's the case. I think, again, there are absolutely predatory, practitioners and maybe even large organizations who are looking to profit off of, the medical transitioning process. But, I think someone mentioned the aspect of personal experiences and how
I did sign up for one of these. What are you talking about? I signed up for these already. So that's, I have, guys, don't worry.
Many trans people, it's extremely expensive. And even if you are on some kind of insurance or even if you are on some kind of plan, it can still, the cost can, mount up a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I guess in any movement, right, there are going to be people that take advantage about it for their own selfish gains.
How much money is, I guess, there to be made in the transition process?
That's a hard question to answer, right? Because you're creating a medical patient for life. So it's over the course of a person's...
Okay, this person is completely conspiracy brained on this one. Yeah, you're not really you're not creating somebody for life, though, because if it doesn't work, if it doesn't make them happy, then they're going to detransition anyway. So misdiagnosing isn't creating anybody for life. I'm sure that there are shitty doctors. But again, like this issue that you have when it comes to trans people, you don't have when it comes to anybody else, which is insane to me.
Lifetime that they would be buying hormones and all this.
It's not accurate.
You have to take
Not every
hormones.
trans person
They
stays
have
on
to-
hormones.
Let's let her speak. Let's let her speak. Let's let her speak. Let's let her speak.
Yeah,
Let's let her speak.
Let's let her speak.
So
Hey, at least that's good. Drew Bleed's been letting shit go crazy lately. I'm happy that this guy is like actively moderating heavily.
So you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people that may come off. It's more so on the trans man side than the trans woman side, where you have to be on hormones forever, otherwise it comes back. And if you have your primary sex organs removed as well. So that's kind of a hard question to answer what it is over the course of a lifetime. I think they've estimated up to 100,000 to 200,000. But like one surgery, so like a vaginoplasty cost about $20,000 to $30,000. I think the phalloplasty costs more, and then you go down a little bit with top surgeries and stuff like that. But it's still thousands of dollars. At least, I mean, a breast augmentation is about $10,000.
I've had children have surgeries and medication for various illnesses, and I always find the way to pay for it. And I found the way to pay for what needed in this case.
How much did it cost? What was the general range?
I'm not comfortable sharing that.
Okay.
I can say that for me, I pay about like $10 every like 4 months for my medication. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
So you've been
Bro, I pay fucking like $30 or $40 a month for my medication. It's crazy. It's fucking crazy.
kind of consistent throughout in each of these prompts of staying on the liberal side.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you might want to ask that may potentially maybe even sway you to the other side, or just something maybe that you're not considering?
My cousin is trans and he is so important to me, and so saying that it's a mental illness, saying that it's pushing when you can see that so many trans people of color are being denied treatment. I don't think
People
that
of
that's fair to
color.
say that it's pushing. I feel like I would be disrespecting someone very close to me if I was over there and saying that it's a mental illness and then they're pushing transitioning just so they can make money.
Okay, so you're back on the undecided. What made you stay here?
It's a bit dangerous to generalize or demonize the medical community and state that there's like a wide contingent or conspiracy.
What? But conservatives love denying the medical community. If anything, it was a conspiracy to be a COVID denier, because how many people, you know how much more expensive it is to go into a hospital than it is to fucking have to go get treated for COVID? A lot more expensive, just so you guys know. Just to be clear, okay?
Conspiracy trying to push transitioning, especially if we don't have evidence of it. I think there's probably, like he was saying, evidence of predatory practitioners and that sort of thing. If it brings them some sort of financial benefit, we do have to question whether their motives are entirely pure, but that could be true of like any disease. So it's kind of both sides, I think, had good points, and both were kind of right. So I'm not in the middle because I can't make a decision. I'm more in the middle because I agree with them both.
Schools should include trans conversation in sex ed.
Of course they should. First of all, schools should have sexual education, okay? Second of all, yeah, of course they should. What that means is like a different conversation. It needs to be age appropriate. Having a young person understand that there's a difference between gender and sex is perfectly fine. No one's going to die over that. And then maybe as they get older, teach them more of like the ideological or the more of like the deeper gender conversations and meetings.
An age appropriate time, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, right.
What is that age appropriate?
I think
I mean, I think that like a young person, like I think that like a kid can learn about, like a 10-year-old can understand like about pronouns, like or not neo-pronouns, that's fucking crazy, but like boy, girl, whatever, non-binary, they can learn about that. Maybe 16 plus, learning a little bit more deeper when it comes to the conversation about gender. But just to be clear, when it comes to people are like, I don't think kids should learn anything about trans people, blah 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 blah. Really? Because you don't know who's educating them then? Those fucking weirdos on TikTok saying that Lorax pronouns are normal. So do you want a teacher teaching actual real things, or do you want some fucking weirdo on the internet teaching them something?
grades 3 or 4, they understand.
So what is that, like around 8, 9, or?
I don't know anymore. My kids are too old, but that sounds about right. I think 8 or 9 years old is a good time because gender is a concept that is formed in the mind of a child around the ages of 2, 3, or 4 years old. By the time they're 7 or 8, they understand the permanency of gender. So I think that's a good time to introduce it.
Now, should they be talked about as just as much as, let's say, heterosexual sex, or more in terms of including different historical relevancy?
I mean, when it's historically relevant, like, yeah, include it. I don't understand what that means. So there's no difference between heterosexual and trans sex. I don't know what the question is there.
Anything like that?
I think it would be great to introduce the difference between gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation, because that is 3 completely different realms. And children can understand the difference between gender expression and gender identity at that age without ever having to talk about sex.
Yeah, I definitely disagree. I think especially what they're proposing right now, a lot of the mainstream sort of education on sex ed is pretty like vulgar. You're looking at a couple like books, you see a lot of
like what? Like, don't say they're vulgar. Tell me what's vulgar about these sexual education books.
Parents going out to like city committee meetings and they're reading books in front of like the school committee, and the school has to like stop the entire thing because they're reading such vulgar stuff.
All it is teaching kids that penises gets hard. Oh, a penis gets hard and then it comes. Kids need to learn that. Like, that's sexual health education. Just learning how their penis works. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Stop acting like a child. The parent, it's always conservatives, like fucking pastors going there. Like, oh, they don't want any sexual health education. They want everybody to just be a fucking virgin until they get married. It's not happening. That's leading to more issues. Sexual health education is attached to consent conversations, and that needs to be talked about with young people.
To push back on that, though, kind of we've been going through like different personal experiences, and some of these cases we might just be hearing about because they're the most extremist of cases.
Sure.
Do you think that's what's going on, or do you think it's more of a common, prevalent instance that's happening around the country?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a differentiation between personal experiences and just what's going on in general. And so, of course, you're going to see like the more popular cases on social media and stuff. But what it really boils down to, the question isn't really so much what's the content, but is it true? And it's not true. And so why should
what he's even talking about has nothing to do with trans people, by the way. He just made that. It has nothing to do with trans people. It's just learning about sexual health education and people having a fucking meltdown about it.
To be learning about it.
I mean, personally, I think that sex education should be simple biology, and then anything above that should be an opt-in system to where parents have to opt in.
No, that's dumb. I just don't agree with that. Like, you can't just have, first of all, he's complaining about biology. That pastor was complaining that they talked about penises getting hard. So you disagree with that pastor. That's number one. Number two, like, no, you have to teach people things. Kids should learn about consent and sex and safe sexual health education. Like, they should learn about condoms. They should learn about shit like that all the time. Of course. What are you talking about?
Their children into that learning. I really don't think it's the responsibility of teachers to be talking to children about that. I think
about like your the erections and shit. Like, who cares?
Really boils down to it is a parental rights issue, and parents make the ultimate decision how.
I mean, how far does that go? Does that go with like, oh, should we teach? Do we let the parents make a decision on whether it's okay to learn whether like people of different colors are okay or equal or not? Like, how far do we go with it? You know what I mean? Like, how much parental consent do you give on certain conversations about like equality between people of different genders, ethnicities, et cetera, et cetera? That's it. It's the same thing effectively.
And learn that.
That's why we're seeing so much transphobia. It's because it's more acceptable to be transphobic than it is to be either homophobic or racist. That's why there's so much transphobia. But if you think about it, transphobia is curing racism because now everybody has something else that they want to hate. And so, you know what? I guess maybe black people will finally get a break.
Agree only because like where I'm from North Carolina, and there was a point where sex ed wasn't being taught, and then there was a point where it was, and when they started teaching sex ed, there were children that were coming forward about like being touched inappropriate and things like that because they didn't know that those things were inappropriate parts because they hadn't been taught otherwise.
Yeah,
so now
that makes
teaching
perfect
children
sense.
about their bodies, about their sex, about their gender, about their expression, you're limiting them. You're
teaching
giving
them
people,
consent.
pedophiles specifically, the opportunity to prey on them because they don't know any better. You're leaving them in the dark.
I
As
just
far as
don't
like
think
gender is concerned, like being trans, had I learned about what trans was at an early age, I think I would have had a much happier life in general.
Yeah.
By 21, I was going into transitioning and everything like that, but I felt and knew that there was something specifically different by the age of like 7, without even knowing what trans was. And had I been taught that, transitioning later on in life would have been completely different.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was the very first prompt we had. I think almost every transsexual I know had that early experience, right? That's happy in their transition. So I agree in that. I really think it is the it's parents' responsibility.
The schools are supposed to pick up where the parents fall off. That's the whole point of sending your children to school.
No, your parents have the right to make the decision for you.
Okay.
I just want to interject right.
I mean, your parents have the right to make the decision about math. I don't. No, we know that there's some things people need to learn, like they need to learn equality between different like sexes, races, etc. They need to learn math, they need to learn English, etc. So, like, yeah, no, I don't think that parents should be able to opt out of the conversation when it comes to sexual health education in general, or when it comes to trans people. It just needs to be age appropriate.
There, and that is a very U.S. way of thinking, is that parental rights trump everything else, because there's a Convention of Children's Rights worldwide, and the U.S. is the only country who hasn't signed on to it.
Interesting.
So
I'm gonna look into
children
that.
in other countries have rights before their parents do. And I think that it should be taught in schools to protect the child, not just so that the parent gets to make all the rules.
Yeah, and just so that the parents prioritizing in a lot of these instances, and parents should be able to advocate for their kids, of course, but in these instances, especially when it comes to sexual health education and things along those lines, it's they're prioritizing the way that they feel over the facts and the reality of the world.
Okay, let's go to the undecided group. Which side do you guys resonate with more, liberals or conservatives?
Hey, what's up, Acrella? You just got sushi. Very good, man.
I think we have all undecided here. Let's start with you, because this is interesting because you've always been on the liberal side until now. What spoke to you that made you undecided in this instance?
Well, I would just like to mention that I actually work in childcare and I work with children. And so as much as I think that we should have comprehensive sex education, I think that 5 years old is a bit young.
Well, nobody said 5, but okay.
I think maybe middle school age, like 10 to high school. I don't think that.
So you agree? I'm so confused. It says school should include trans conversation in sex ed. So you would agree? Why is she on the? Okay. All right.
Parents
hold
should
on.
have completely all the say, because if that parent is more on one side or the other, then they are going to push their child to do what they want them to do, and that child should be able to make that decision for themselves once they are at that age.
Maybe both sides actually do accept, the fact that trans individuals exist. However, more of the discrepancy is around the age and when it's being introduced. What do you think?
I think she mentioned around 8 or 9. I think that's a good age. I have a little brother who's 11, and when he was around that age, he was able to understand that I was queer and that my cousin was trans, and he was able to understand that we were different.
I would say around 8 or 9 is probably fine in my opinion, because that's generally the age in which children have a solid grasp on their own identity. And it's usually, about 10 years after that, maybe, that they, on average, will disclose that. But at that age is when kids will usually figure out that they're not cis, if that's the case.
This lady, she started with this concept of permanency. I just thought that was so profound.
What's that?
Undergirding the point that I've been making from the outset, that sex, if you want to call it gender, there's a permanency about it that needs to be respected. And when you're teaching little kids about transgenderism, you're automatically injecting confusion. That feeds to the very
life is confusing, man. I mean, like, not for nothing, but you want to know what's more confusing than learning about transgenderism, as this person says it? Learning about God. I'm not trying to be an asshole. I grew up very religious, went to church every week, every Sunday. That's confusing, man. That's confusing, and it makes you feel kind of really stressed out sometimes, you know, because you feel like if you do something wrong, you might be punished. It's kind of sucks, you know. When I used to, you know, I used to question my own sexuality, whether I like dudes, I used to get really distressed. Like, it's distressing, you know, that'll contribute to more of a fucking mental health issue than anything else. So I think it's something to keep in mind.
Contagion that we were talking about at the outset. It breeds this confusion into children. That's a real problem. I agree with the point that was made here. I don't think that sex should really be pushed onto kids at all. I mean,
Nobody's
for
pushing
hundreds of
sex onto
years,
kids.
public education didn't teach sex ed, and things.
Yep, and for hundreds of years, thousands of years, we used to do slavery. Things used to be different, and now they're not. Like, we changed them. That's how societies work. Conversations about sexual health education are conversations helping your kids not get assaulted and molested. That's what it boils down to. If you don't teach your kid about like their penis and their vagina and other sexual health functions in an informative way, they're not going to be able to learn that what is and isn't appropriate. Part of teaching your kid about their penis and vagina is teaching about consent when it comes to people. And like that other guy had said before, you know, a big part of it is that when kids started getting educated on this stuff, kids were coming forward about getting assaulted because they were like, oh shit, like I'm being abused. They didn't even know it because they're just having a parental figure that they've been taught their whole life to respect and do anything that they say is telling them to keep quiet about it. So
went pretty well. You didn't have all this confusion. And regarding the situation about pedophilia or otherwise, you don't need to teach children about transgenderism for them to know that somebody shouldn't be touching your private parts.
Yeah, well, maybe you should teach the Catholic Church that.
Clarify your points.
You know, I think, you know, my takeaway, I guess, you know, I would say I still kind of am unsure where I would stand specifically, like in terms of age ranges and, you know, content. But I think, you know, for me, I think there is kind of, for me, at the center of it is that conflict between, you know, parents that don't want specific things to be talked about and then parents who just don't care at all. But at least knowing that the conversation's going on and maybe signing off on that. I know we've seen that in the past with, you know, like taking the slips home and being, you know, showing the parent if they, you know, like, we're going to take the kid.
Yeah, I understand doing that, but this isn't material that's too advanced for kids, so I don't care about that. Like, if it's a graphic movie that's like rated PG-13, sure, send it home with the kids, but this isn't PG-13 content, so I don't agree with that.
Kids into classes.
I think that parents should be able to have a conversation about what's going on in the school, and you can, like, that's fine, but at the end of the day, if it's considered criteria or something that's supposed to be learned in school, then that is it. That's it. That's where it stops for me.
Talk about this, you know, sign off if you want them to or not.
However, wouldn't that kind of introduce a bit of a slippery slope? What if that happens when it comes to discussions around history, around race? Do you think that could lead to parents kind of essentially shaping the worldview that may not be factually accurate?
You know, when you start talking about, I guess, you know, teaching about like sex ed and let's say gender expression, sexual orientation, I think you do walk a different line between like, you know, bringing up points of history or, you know, even like the sciences. I mean, everything, you know, what you include in a curriculum,
but there is like a mental health science that this does exist. So how do you parse with that information?
Science, factual, even mathematics, like there's some kind of, you know, political basis there, whether it's super political or super apolitical. I mean, there's always going to be interest there. And so I think what's really important is, you know, curriculum transparency with parents. I think parents and students should be involved in the development of that process so that everyone.
I think that they should be involved in what the kids are going to know. That doesn't mean that they should necessarily be developed in the process once it's set. Like once we know, okay.
At least has a say or at least can see what's being.
How does a trans conversation relate to sex ed? The question is, schools should include trans conversation in sex ed. So it's in that conversation of like, would that be considered in sexual education?
Being talked about at the table.
You really have bounced around everywhere. So I'm curious if you wanted to ask
this host is a savage. What the fuck?
Specific things. Or?
Part of my issue, I think, with the idea of like having it mandatory.
I feel like people exaggerate how confusing this stuff is. When I was a kid, I gained basic understanding of this stuff pretty easy. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it probably isn't that complicated, to be honest with you.
Certain ages is that some kids, and this is why I do think parents should have the right to pull their kids out, because I think some parents are, like the really involved parents do know what their kids are ready for and what they aren't. Some kids are not quite ready for those conversations. I think one thing that I heard that was a little concerning to me on the liberal side and kind of kept me here was I did hear someone, I think, say something about parents of other cultures not being willing to, and I've lived in 5 countries.
What does that mean?
I've lived in 2 Muslim majority countries. I've lived in a Hindu, technically should be secular, but Hindu majority country. And I've lived in a Catholic country. And I think the Western mindset and how we approach issues, and we have to understand, like, when you're coming out of the country and you're bringing your children into a new culture as an immigrant, you want to keep your values at home, right? And there's things that you're going to be concerned about and nervous about, partially because of like religious affiliation maybe, or just not experiencing it. And so if schools want those conversations to happen, the focus needs to not be going directly to the children, but it needs to be going to the parents.
I disagree with what you're saying. It's silly to me. Here's fundamentally what I'm hearing, that people come here with different values, which is perfectly reasonable and understandable, and they should have the right to have that. And so now they should be able to dictate what we do and how we teach because they have those values. No, right? We're not going to fold on our values because like you come from a country that doesn't have those same values. It's perfectly fine for you to question some things when it comes to gender dysphoria and everything and all that, and I get that. But this is our education system, and I don't think that it's appropriate for you to be able to be like, no, I don't want you to learn parts of the education system because I'm uncomfortable, and that's it. I mean, like, what about countries that believe that you should be able to have an age of consent of 13? Do you think it's appropriate for them to be able to come here and be like, well, you know what, I think I should be able to marry a 13-year-old because my country has... No, of course not. There's always... Like, if you want to come into the country, you have to adjust to our values. I'm not going to change my mind on this thing. I'm going to change my mind on it. I don't understand. I just feel like it's silly. I'm not going to compromise. I have no problem. Like, you can come here and believe what you want, but you have to follow our rules. So if you want to believe that every other race is inferior or whatever, like, you do you, or you want to believe that, you know, whatever, gay people are bad or that's fine. Believe what you want. But like, that doesn't mean that you get to have access to dictate the way that we're going to treat people and educate people just because you have a feeling about something that's not even necessarily scientifically accurate.
Prioritizing assimilating the parents into the culture so they are aware how to have the conversations with
That's how you assimilate people, is that you educate them. So, okay. So you assimilate them by not educating them? That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Kids at home, because what ultimately happens is if the child is learning something at school and they feel like they can't go home to their parents, and the parents find out about it in a way that's not, you know, congruent or whatever, this creates a distrust from those parents with the school system. And, you know, I mean, that just brings...
So yeah, make sure the parents know this is what they're going to be learning. And if they don't like it, then they could pull their kids out of school and homeschool if that's what they prefer. But
chaos to America, that's a very serious issue.
Do you think this is a uniquely American problem?
I think it's a Western viewpoint problem.
Minors are capable of making life-altering decisions.
Yeah, absolutely disagree. There's no way.
Probably not, no, but minors aren't making life-altering decisions necessarily, right? Like, again, we're talking about mental health. We're talking about doctors being involved. So a kid's not going, you know what, I'm just going to chop my wiener off. No kid is doing that. You have to go through... You have to talk to your parents, you have to talk to educators, or rather you have to talk to doctors, scientists. I mean, that's where the information is coming from. So they're not making these decisions by themselves. And then, like, of course, there's other life-changing decisions. Like, if you have fucking cancer, I mean, does a kid have the ability to consent to not having cancer? That's life-changing to not have cancer and stay alive. So, like, yeah, when it comes to medical, it's very different than... It's not just a kid going, you know what? Cut my wiener off. No, it's a lot more than that. So...
Minors aren't able to make decisions whether to join the military, get married, or make tattoos. And so when you're talking about something that's...
really? Because according to religion, you can get married. As a minor, I don't know. Okay, interesting.
Super important, like sex, gender, whatever you want to call it. There's no reason we should be chopping up kids, putting a bunch of hormones in them that are super dangerous that we don't quite know the effects of, and then completely...
We have a pretty good idea of the effects. Does there need to be more long-term studies? Sure, but we know more... Like, the decision that we know more than you're trying to allude to. So, okay.
Changing the life. That's what I'm, like, really passionate about, especially just, I think this is, like, the voice, this is the sentiment among, like, a lot of Americans is, you can do what you want, but why mess with the kids? And so that's where kind of I'm at. It's like, why mess with the kids?
For the purpose of this discussion, we're defining minor.
Because all the information we have says that it's just the right way to go. So I'm messing with kids.
It says under 18.
When you say that we don't know the effects of these chemicals and these drugs and all that, it's worth mentioning that generally speaking, all these medicines that are used were first introduced to be used to treat cis people for various things. Joe Rogan, for example, takes TRT, very similar drug to what trans men take. Estradiol is used to treat menopause sometimes. There are people who take spironolactone, which is taken by trans femmes. People take that same drug to treat blood pressure.
Yeah, but when we're talking about minors specifically, it's an issue because I don't think that they...
Hey, what if your minor has high blood pressure though? This is the thing. If your minor has like high blood pressure or some kind of issue, something that would require life-altering treatment, you wouldn't be having the same perspective, right? We understand that it's only because it's trans people. That's the whole thing. Right? Like, it's a medical issue, so they should have access to what they need.
They have the cognitive ability to consent to long-term decisions, especially when we start to see, like we can talk about.
If you don't think a kid can consent to long-term decisions, then you don't think that a kid should be able to believe in God. That's a very long-term decision on your values. So I don't know. I mean, I understand that it's not as big as going through like an actual physical transition, but like that's a big thing too. That's very long-term. Learning a value like that is huge. It's a big thing. I mean, I feel like you're just underselling what kids are prepared for, especially when it's an informed decision with the doctor and parents together.
Studies show that 90% will end up desysting by the age of 20. We know what people
Desysting isn't the same as detransitioning. A desysting doesn't mean that they detransitioned from a gender dysphoria diagnosis. It's not even close to the same thing. It just means that somebody like changed their mind. It's not referring to people with gender dysphoria. It's referring to just people that are identifying as like bisexual for the most part. So
puberty blockers, for example, what they do for precocious puberty, but they've never been studied and they're not FDA approved. They're prescribed off-label for people in key growth years and adolescence. And so we're starting to see, even Marcy Bowers talked about starting somebody on puberty blockers and then going straight to cross-sex hormones, and every time they're never able to fully, achieve orgasm as an adult. Every single person that she's ever had.
Sure, that should be part of like the informed decision process. If that's a long-term effect that you might not be able to have an orgasm, like yeah, that's something that you need to have in mind when it comes to this for sure. That's just an informed decision that the parents and the kid need to be able to engage with, because yeah, maybe they can't have an orgasm, but also might prevent them from taking their own life. So it's just like pros and cons here.
And she's the president of WPATH. You have to do the studies. You have to figure out, and you have to put a pause button on it. Otherwise, what we're doing is literally
what she's saying makes no sense. You cannot do the studies and put a pause on it. You do the studies through providing the treatment, and also like they're giving them their perspective too much credit because they're on like the factually based on the data we have incorrect perspective. Like what we're doing based on the data we have is right. So to be like, we shouldn't do anything. Well, the data says this is the way to go right now. Yeah, but I don't like it. So, well, okay. You do this, you continue to monitor the trend, and then you adjust based on the way that it's working.
Experimenting on children.
So one thing that's also important to consider too is that currently there are laws, right, when it comes to voting, drinking alcohol, even buying cigarettes at this point, right? I think that is something to consider in terms of this debate.
We don't hold someone's hand.
No, not really. I mean, unless alcohol and cigarettes are a treatment to any illness, it's nothing to consider at all, actually. It's not even relevant. We're not just talking about a thing. We're talking about a diagnosable thing. Like, alcohol is not a treatment for anything, okay? Except for, my depression. So...
And when we go in to vote.
Do you think socially transitioning isn't enough for these kids? It depends on the kid. If it's a teenager, if all they need is socially transitioning, then good. Like good for them, then we're good. But if they need more than socially transitioning, they should have access to that. It's based on what the medical provider and the kid or the teenager are referring to.
We go in and vote on our own. When a child who is 16 makes a medical decision to transition, it is made with a team. There's parents, there's psychologists, there's endocrinologists. It's not just one child walking in all by themselves to do it by themselves. We trust children to prepare our food for us at fast food restaurants. We trust children to drive combines on farmland in all 50 states. Why can't we trust a child to tell us that they are not comfortable and that we need to treat them medically?
Actually kind of based. I didn't even think about that. That is true.
With a medical transition.
Because those are practices, those are jobs that aren't going to affect their lives forever. So that's...
Well, yeah, well, in different ways, not physically, but yeah, sure. Okay, whatever.
Not even, I mean, that comparison just isn't going to work at all.
That's the first... The point that she's trying to make is that you're saying that like kids aren't ready for certain things, but they're more ready than like you think. But okay.
Farm accident.
Getting back to
yeah, that's true. You can get to a farm accident and end up like cutting your fucking hand off. That's true. Yeah, it can be life altering.
And children cannot commit to these life altering decisions. They don't even know what life they can have. There are so many options that are available to them, and they get cut short. You're making statements about how they have all these.
Well, yeah, but you'd argue that they'd get cut short because they would take their life because they'd have higher mental health issues. And even if they aren't suicidal, being like significantly distressed is going to reduce their ability to be productive. Like this other woman said, like when she was able to get treatment for her kids, they were more productive at school. It's a huge deal.
Adults guiding them into this. That's the whole point. They're guiding them into getting their bodies mutilated when they should be dealing with the mental health issues. Wallace Wong is an...
Well, you want to know what? I want my fucking foreskin back. Okay, give me my fucking foreskin back. You're sitting here talking about, oh, trans people, they got this, they get top surgery, bottom surgery. It's so bad for kids. Why did you cut my fucking penis tip off when I was born? Religion. Why'd you cut my penis tip off? I want it back, dude. I want it back. Give me my wiggler tip. I'm just saying. You talk about fucking genital mutilation, but it seems why is my ult not going off? But what about my penis tip?
Unscrupulous medical professional in British Columbia, and he is part of the whole profit regime. They are rushing kids into these procedures. I know this because a father found out that his daughter was being
I know this because of one person, one anecdote.
transitioned without his knowledge or without knowledge or permission. And when he was telling the public about it, he went to jail.
Well, because there was permission, just not from him. It was by the mother, right? So
That's what
and the doctors.
Canada does. So it's not just about big pharma making big money. It's about taking advantage of children that have serious problems. I'm making a personal story here. I hope you're listening. Okay? This is horrendous stuff. These children are confused. They have mental health issues, and they shouldn't be
Yes, that's exactly the point, and that's why they need the correct treatment, and that can be the correct treatment. So
stigmatized. I want to be very clear about that. But the answer isn't to put them under the knife or put chemicals into them that will alter them permanently.
I don't
yeah, but the permanence isn't necessarily bad if it's the right type of permanence.
necessarily believe that anybody's pushing anybody to be trans. Like when you're like, leave the kids alone, it's like, look at how you talk about trans people. Who would want to be trans in that sense? Like who would want to be pushing somebody into that lifestyle to be treated?
It is happening.
Hey, let's
I'm
let
sorry.
him talk. Let's let him talk.
It's not happening.
I'm passionate about it. I'm sorry. How many friends I've had who've been mutilated?
Just because you
We have a lot of trans. Wait, what? How many friends I've had that have been mutilated? There's no fucking way that this person is like friends with every detransitioner in the world. What the fuck are you talking about? I'm not buying into the idea that the religious conservative has like a ton of fucking trans friends. It's just not happening. Sorry.
You might not have been able to make that at that age. Doesn't mean everybody that's 16 or 17 can't make that choice at that age. There's so many
True.
16 and 17-year-olds who have been emancipated, who have been, not emancipated, but when they take care of themselves legally and like their own legal guardian, at that age, they're making that specific decision that I'm old enough and mature enough to make this decision for myself and my life. Like, just because you couldn't do it doesn't mean somebody else can't.
Yeah, to disagree, it's just the laws disagree with that, right? So we have laws against marriage, joining the military, alcohol, drugs.
And we don't have laws against minors getting gender affirming care. So
all these sorts of different
But that
things.
has nothing to do with them as people.
Yeah, but overall, there are laws against these things, and so we're talking about people. We're talking about a group of people who believe in Santa, right? You're seeing younger and younger.
Bro, he's so close to realizing how fucking like we talk about. Yeah, a group of people that believe in Santa. We're talking about a group of people that are voting against this stuff that believe in God. And again, God is great, but like there's no facts about it, and there's no difference between fucking God and Santa. I mean, not to be an asshole, what's the fucking difference? They both seem like real nice guys. But just because the books are more robust for one doesn't make it more like real. I'm not saying it's fake. I'm just saying that there's no facts there. There's no actual facts or logic there as you try to take away people's rights based on facts and logic.
People get transitioned, right? You're talking about people with this tenuous grip on reality. There's no reason we should be pushing sex. When I was 13, 14, I was thinking about my friends, video games, sports.
Crazy.
Let's go to the undecided. Which side do you guys resonate with most? So I actually want to pick up right where we left off. How old are you?
17.
Have you gone through different phases throughout your life?
When I was 3 and 4, I really wanted to be famous. I wanted to be a movie star. I wanted to be a singer.
Okay.
When I was 6 to 7, I wanted to rule the world, actually, quite literally. I thought I'd do a great job. I thought I knew everything. One thing I really wanted to do, and I was really into this idea, was building islands and taking all my friends and family there, and like we could have our own little community type of thing. And then when I was basically like 12, I think 13 maybe, basically up to 15, I was really into the idea of becoming an endocrinologist because of the awesome endocrinologist I had. And then when I was 16, so this would have been last year, kind of realized after failing chemistry that maybe medicine was not for me. So I took a government class that I loved, and I've always had a love of politics and that sort of stuff. So now I'm kind of focused on getting into international relations and politics.
Cool.
Well, I mean, at least you're doing the famous part well right now. So you went through different, 4 to 5 different stages, but you're kind of like on the liberal side at the moment. Can you explain why you decided to step on this stage?
There's certain age groups that probably should not be making life-altering decisions, like 3 to 4-year-olds, absolutely not. But it
Yeah, no 3-year-old is making a life-altering decision, of course. So that's
does
a good thing.
ultimately, I do
Like just socially transitioning. Just I'm not saying that she is saying that they do, but socially transitioning isn't a life-altering decision. You can literally just change back. So
think parents do need to be involved with that, just because parents do oftentimes have their children's best interests at heart, even
Sure.
if at times to the public or to the child it seems unfair. So I agree, but maybe just a little less with the conservative side this time.
People also have said that you don't even develop your prefrontal cortex until you're 25. You know, I'm 26, and I feel like I can probably resonate with that.
I think the conservative side kept bringing up how there's certain things that you can't do, like in certain age groups. I think they were talking about like joining the military, drinking, but in Europe you can drink at 16. In the US, you can drive at 16, but in other countries, Middle Eastern and
I started drinking when I was like 14 years old, bro. My mom would let me drink beers as long as it was at family parties.
European, you can't drive till 18. So how do we determine, like, in actuality, what the limits are?
Do you guys have any thoughts amongst
amongst us
two, what made you guys go to the conservative side? I'd love to hear a discussion between you two.
The one thing that really resonated with me is we're talking, I think he said, we're talking about people who still believe in make-believes.
Yeah, like God. I'm sorry, but
I just don't think they understand the gravity of the situation. Maybe not just transitioning, but there's certain decisions that they don't understand the gravity of.
I would push back a little. I think, like, especially when it comes to teenagers, I would say like 15, 16, I would say high school range. I think like we should probably give them a little bit more credit. I think, you know, when it comes to something like that, I mean, I would say like, I think it's, of course, you know what I mean, we're talking about minor, it's a huge range, but I think we should in general give a little bit more credit where it's due to them. I will say the reason I'm here is because I think I just agree fundamentally with the idea like making life-altering choices. I don't think, you know, anyone under the age of 18, I guess maybe might be arbitrary, but, you know, in that minor range, as we've defined it in this country, I would agree. I don't think, you know, life-altering, whether that's a medical transition or even something like, you know, like what school you go to, like what college. I mean, you know, minors make decisions like that all the time, but they're not most of the time, and I would hope, usually they're not, you know, completely on their own. You know, we have support systems, and I think what's really important is that we extend those support systems, so like counseling and, you know, people at schools and, you know, educating parents so that students aren't going into decisions completely on their own.
Minors should be allowed to medically transition.
like obviously I'm gonna say like yeah, as long as they're properly diagnosed. So I mean, I've pretty much at this point have made that take pretty clear.
Absolutely not.
Never.
That has not changed for me. We're talking
Never.
about mental
I feel like we
health
basically already asked this question.
issues.
Yeah.
And there are a whole host of problems that children deal with when they're struggling with identity or gender dysphoria. Let's treat those issues. Let's treat those causes.
They already
I have
are.
mentioned
It's
numerous
gender-affirming
cases
care.
of former trans kids who were pushed into it, parents who
about it.
tried to protect their kids and were punished for doing so.
It's usually one parent disagreeing with another parent. Both those, in the instance that he brought up, it was like a dad that didn't like that his kid was getting gender-affirming care, but the mom was on board and so were the doctors. So at that point, yeah.
So this is a very
I mean, we know all the time that there are times when parents make bad decisions. Like, you know, when they shame their kid for being gay, that's a pretty bad decision as well.
fraught affair. These are irreversible, damaging procedures, and we
can
have
be.
so many detransitioners that are coming
And
out
that's sometimes
warning
cool.
the next generation not to do this.
I think it's worth mentioning.
Again, proportionality is very important. Percentage-wise, we're not seeing a lot of detransitioners coming out against it.
That the detransitioners, while I do sympathize with them and I think it's unfortunate that the medical system has failed them, they're a statistical anomaly in the grand scheme of how many people have transitioned medically and surgically.
We don't know that though. So
We do, factually, yes. What are you talking? We don't know that. Yes, we do. But all the data points to that. What are you talking about? We don't know that? What are you fucking talking about?
the issue is we don't know what the detransition rate really is.
We have the detransition rate. What do you? Yes, there might be more detransitioners. But based on the data we have now, we do know that there's like less than 1%. So let's operate with that data. As more come forward, make sure we listen to them. But we do know, you can't just say, I know that we have a factual statistic, but we can't listen to that because we don't necessarily know. It's like the conversation about animals being extinct. Well, there might be 5 left. Okay. Still extinct. That's why extinct is mostly gone. What are you talking about?
Simply because they're falling off the rules. If you don't have your primary sex organs removed, then you can literally stop taking hormones and nobody's following up on them. Also, we also know that the longest study out is the 5-year study, and the average detransition takes place 4 to 10 years after. And so,
yeah, right. That's why we would need more time to have more data. But based on all the data we have now, you want to operate the wrong way based on speculation, where people want to operate like the correct way based on all the available data that they have. I mean, which is not the same, not
So
comparable.
those people are not being counted in those studies. I think that we should be working on mental health coverage. We should be getting them to an age of adulthood. We shouldn't be mutilating them as at a young age. And I think that they, like he said, like your prefrontal cortex is where you make impulse decision making. And so that's what develops last. And so we should be getting them there. I think we can look at social transition. Social transition might not be a zero-sum game because we see that it kind of generally leads to transition. But let them socially transition, get them to adulthood, and then see where we're at.
I agree. Let them socially transition, use hormone blockers, start cross hormones at an appropriate age when the body is ready to be receiving cross hormones later on. I also agree that we shouldn't be mutilating children. I don't believe anyone's being mutilated, but surgery does.
And this also isn't a conversation of, this is medically transitioned, so it's not just about surgical. This is just like a general thing with like different hormones and whatnot. But like, yeah, generally I'd like to, you know, it's top surgery. Some people are getting it like 16, and I think it's a problem. But the problem is, what the biggest issue is, I don't even know if it's a problem, but the biggest issue is that the age of consent in those states are 16. So why are you so aggressive about not getting top surgery, but like you don't care about kids being able to sleep with adults? Like, what the fuck?
Doesn't have to happen before 18 if they are already being treated with cross hormones or hormone blockers, and we can wait until they're 18 if we are helping them and affirming their gender. I don't believe anybody has an agenda of chopping children up.
Yeah, I would just say ultimately those who are promoting this.
Maybe the wicked witch, that one witch, that Hansel and Gretel, I think she wants to chop people up, bro. So that, you know.
And those who are accepting it will be accountable. We're seeing a lot of different lawsuits coming out. There's a transgender or detransitioner who is now suing Kaiser Permanente.
Cool, and they're not going to win. This is just a publicized lawsuit. They're suing because okay, I know what they're talking about. Like, they should sue, but they're going to lose. They didn't get bad medical treatment. They got the medical treatment based on the diagnosis. It just happened to be a misdiagnosis. So they're not going, just because it's a lawsuit doesn't mean anything. You could sue over anything.
Up in like San Jose area because she felt like she
the only gender I care about is the gay gender. That's it. That's all I care about.
I don't even know what gender they are, but they felt like they were.
There's a lawsuit coming out from a detransition. I don't know the gender of the person. I don't remember. Okay, it sounds like you're not very invested in this. Then it sounds like you don't really care.
Led into this, they were tricked. They were kind of ran into that system, and
that's not true. That's what they're claiming. Doesn't mean it's true. And everybody feels like they're the victim of everything.
And you're going to see a lot of rise of these lawsuits. And so, just to finish, I would say that
proportionally,
children are too young to transition. They can't fully grasp this concept, and then also it's just not true. And so we shouldn't be pushing it for kids. And I think the solution to this is accepting who you actually are.
Wow.
Accepting.
Hey, trans people, have you tried just accepting who you are? You still want to kill yourself? Oh, well, maybe you need more than that. Like we've already thought of that. We already thought, like, hey, have you tried accepting who you are? Yeah, I still want to die. Oh, that's step number 1. We tried that. It's not working. Trans people need gender affirming care. Like, what are you talking about? This guy's out of his fucking mind. Oh my God.
I think your actual body going through therapy, and I'm a Christian, seeking the gospel,
oh fuck, guys, of course he's a Christian. Guys, isn't it preposterous that Santa Claus exists? Do you think that's real? Sky Daddy, please. Please. I know that there are children dying of cancer around the world that don't have access to medical treatment, but this football game is so much more fucking important. Holy fuck. By the way, this is logical what I'm doing. I'm praying, I'm crying and praying in the middle of my bedroom, in the middle of the living room, that my favorite fucking sports ball team will win. This is what God is for. Please. But even though there's kids dying of cancer, I don't pray for them, by the way. Don't give a shit. Fuck that. But this trans thing? What? That's crazy. That's so crazy. This trans thing doesn't make any sense. I'm going to go to a place every Sunday and talk to a guy about a Sky Guardian that thought that it was kind of cool to kill everybody except for one of each gender, to kill everybody except for a boy and a girl of every animal. That's the guy. That's my guy. That's real. Dude, did you know somebody talked to a burning bush? Hey, Jesus, that guy said he was the son of God. That's real. By the way, the homeless guy, though, With schizophrenia, I'm saying that's not real. He's probably fibbing. But the other guy, before we figured out what schizophrenia was, that one was real, and I'm gonna write a book about it, and I'm gonna study that book, and I'm gonna live by this fucking gospel. This, even though it has 3,000 different translations and versions, this is the real one. This is the right religion. Oh, this is facts. Shut the fuck up. It's just annoying.
We're made in God's image and likeness, and so allowing God to speak into that through prayer and sacraments and yes.
Somebody push him on his fucking religious perspective.
I get the argument of, you're not developed until you're 25, but if that's the case, then people shouldn't be experiencing anxiety and so on at 26, if that's going to be like the main point of argument. Like, I started paying bills and working at 15, 16, put myself through school. I bought my first car, 16, but my second car, my third car, all on my own, and I wish somebody at that time had looked at me and told me that I wasn't allowed to be making specific decisions for myself, because I think that's on a person-to-person basis, and I completely agree with you that if they're at that time, they're ready for that, then they're ready for it, and if they're not, they're not.
So now let's see the final decision from the undecided group.
All right, let's see it, dude. I'm ready for this to be over. I'm ready for it to be over, dude. I'm burnt out.
Now undecided. What's your final decision?
I forgot that an hour-long reaction was going to take me a fucking hour, 2 hours long to go through it. All right.
Spectrums. So let's start out.
All right. It looks like we got 2 on the conservative side and 1 on the progressive side. Sounds like they need better progressives to argue their points, because their conservatives are objectively incorrect about this topic. And for every baby that wants to cry in the comment section, just come to the stream, and it doesn't matter.
With what made you go to the liberal side?
I think that you made some really good points about being able to start puberty blockers and socially transition. And surgeries do not need to happen before 18. They can happen after, but as long as the person can decide to start puberty blockers and decide to socially transition, because what if they don't make it to 25? What
Sure.
if they're not still alive to transition at 25 when they're fully developed? So I just don't, sorry. And I've seen my cousin that I mentioned.
I gotta increase the speed. I gotta get through this. You're getting upset.
I can't imagine my life without
that.
them, and if they were not, if they're not able to transition, I know the effect that will have on their life, and I can't imagine it.
Okay, cool.
I think for me, what made me come to the conservative side is I definitely think that social transitioning is acceptable. I think
most of the conservatives don't believe
the
that.
case of Angelina Jolie's daughter, who went through a long phase of, I guess, we were not entirely sure if it was gender dysphoria or not, but wanted to present as male, and then came to an age when they did decide that that was something they no longer wanted to do. And so I really respect that opinion, and I am also concerned about that. I really genuinely. We also, if we're not entirely sure what the medical transitioning has long-term effects, or the medicine itself on brain development and all that stuff, I think we should just be very wary of letting children transition, even if it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but again, all the data we have is pointing us the right direction. So
with medical, teams, because as you said earlier, science is constantly a changing field.
I still lean very much towards the middle, but I think if I had to pick, I lean right now a little bit more on the conservative side. And I think the point you made about how we just don't know really the detransition rate. Transitioning as a
we do. we know the detransition rate. What that person said was a lie, incorrect objectively. We know the detransition rate. Will more people come forward? Absolutely, but you're not going to know until they do. And based on the data, we're doing the right thing. So let's say 10 years from now, based on all the data we have now, what we're doing, the detransition rate goes from 1% to 3%. That's a huge jump. Guess what? 97% of people are still getting treated the correct way. That's how we do science. So for us to say, let's not do this treatment at all, despite the fact that everything so far points to it being the correct thing, because conservatives are sad, yeah, some people are getting saved by not transitioning. Woo! And then most people are getting shit on for it. So, okay.
Process, medical transition, also social transition, and you're absolutely right. In 10 years from now, someone's experience might not be the exact same. I'm not saying that that's the case for everyone. I'm saying that that's probably still not even the majority of people, but I do think it's still a significant amount to take into consideration. There's still a lot that maybe we just don't fully understand, and I think until we get to that point,
we know most of it, but sure.
I'll just err on the side of caution.
Well, we already are. Okay, great. Anyway, we need to continue to study this.
At least that's how I see it.
Clearly, we all have our own biases, and hopefully we can consider all these different personal experiences as well as statistics. So thank you.
Yeah. All right, cool video.